Path of Exile 2's 0.3 update, the Third Edict, added a lot of new stuff to the game, including some new unique items, as is tradition with a new Path of Exile patch. And we're going to be discussing the crazy potential of one of those new items, the Blood of the Warrior, which is a unique life flask. So this flask has some interesting mechanics. It has 90% less life recovered, lowering its total life recovery down from 700 or so to just 70. So this flask, in terms of the amount of life recovery it provides, is somewhere between a lesser and medium life flask, and those are the flasks you'll be using in your first few levels of the game, making it pretty terrible for recovering life into the endgame. But fear not, that's not why you'll be using this flask. This is the downside on the flask, to make up for the incredible power it can provide. The next modifier makes it so the Blood of the Warrior's effect is not removed when your life reaches full. This is functionally the same as the Pathfinder's Enduring Elixir's notable, and importantly, this means that you can use it while your life is full, and it will remain active for its full duration. And it's a very long duration too, due to another modifier on this flask, which can roll up to 50% increased duration on a max roll, at which point you'd have a flask that lasts for 7.5 seconds. Now, to somewhat make up for the lack of life recovery on this flask, you'll recoup a percentage of the damage you take from hits during its effect as life, which is recovered over a base duration of 8 seconds by default. However, let's get on to the juicy part of this flask. Gain 3 to 5 rage when hit by an enemy during effect, and no inherent loss of rage during effect. Now, rage is a buff that's most commonly associated with melee because the large majority of methods of obtaining rage are directly tied to melee mechanics. For example, rage gained on melee hit, or rage gained when using a warcry based on enemy power in range. But rage itself is not a melee specific buff. Rage simply grants 1% more attack damage per stack, not more melee damage. So that means that rage works to boost the damage of projectile attacks too, such as bow attacks, and it also works for crossbows as well. Both grenades and bolts will have their damage boosted by rage. Now, by default, rage has a maximum of 30, at which point you'd be gaining 30% more attack damage. But rage has a built-in decay mechanic where you lose rage over time if you haven't taken damage or gained rage in the last few seconds. And this inherent rage loss mechanic happens very quickly. You lose 1 rage every 0.1 seconds, so 10 rage per second by default if you haven't taken damage or gained rage in the last 2 seconds. And here's the thing, if you're playing melee, it's quite trivial to keep your rage up a decent amount of the time. And even when your rage does drop off, you can build it up very quickly again by using several of the aforementioned rage generation methods. But for a ranged build, there is little to no methods of generating rage, and that's where this flask comes into play. Not just to generate rage, but also to keep all of it up consistently. The Blood of the Warrior flask grants you up to 5 rage upon being hit by an enemy, and it prevents the inherent rage loss mechanic whilst the flask is active. And we already discussed that this flask doesn't stop when your life is full, and it can be used while you're on full life. But it also has enough charges to be used 7 times before depleting, and with a high duration roll that's almost a minute of use. And that's not factoring in gaining any charges from things like monster kills or the passive tree or any modifiers on your gear. Now, you do of course have to click the flask. I'm not suggesting that you should macro it or anything. Essentially, whilst mapping in normal gameplay, this flask will be up 100% of the time, and you could just run through the map as you do normally, and naturally you'll take some hits as you progress the map, eventually reaching max rage and keeping it up permanently for 30% more attack damage. That is extremely powerful for ranged attack builds that previously had no access to rage at all. But you can do a lot more than just the baseline use of this flask on its own. Because, surprise surprise, this item is very good on energy shield builds, both hybrid and chaos inoculation, because those setups don't need their life flask for recovery most of the time, especially following the nerfs to Eternal Youth. So, right side builds win once again. And this is really powerful with chaos inoculation, because you can make use of the Berserk persistent buff. This skill reserves 30 spirit to boost the effect of rage. and a level 20 Berserk gem with 20 quality would improve the default 30 rage to provide 51% more attack damage. Now, Berserk also has the downside that it makes you lose a percentage of your maximum life per rage per second whilst you are not losing rage. So with this Flask active, that would be all of the time. But with Chaos Inoculation, you only have 1 life, and this modifier makes you lose a fraction of that 1 life per second. Now, to be clear, this doesn't actually discard the life loss. If you have no life recovery, you will die after enough time has passed once the life loss has reached enough to make you lose your 1 life. But having any form of life recovery will cancel this out. For example, having just 1 life regeneration would work. But you don't even need that, because you have the Blood of the Warrior going all of the time, and even though the recovery from this flask is tiny, it's plenty enough to ensure that you'll never die to the life loss on a CI character. And you could improve this combo by investing into maximum rage. For example, you could anoint Battle Trance for an additional 8 maximum rage, and at 38 rage with a 20/20 Berserk gem, you'd have 64% more attack damage. That is wild. That's about as much as you gain from 2 good damage supports multiplied together. But there's other things you could do too. For example, you can anoint Ignore Pain to also gain increased stun threshold from your rage. And that's 60% increased stun threshold at 30 rage. That is really good. And what's more, this also gets multiplied as rage effect by Berserk. So with a 20/20 Berserk gem and 30 rage, you'd have 51% more attack damage and 101% increased stun threshold. And how about this one with a view to bossing? A lot of really good builds this league are absolutely deleting bosses, so ideally you wouldn't need to have your Flask active for too long, but by anointing the new Blood of Rage notable, this provides a way to generate rage by simply spamming your Blood of the Warrior Flask 4 times at the start of a boss fight. You then have maximum rage for the boss fight, and you still have 3 uses to go after that one. Now, in terms of generating rage, GGG overhauled the Font of Rage support gem in this patch. This support used to simply provide rage generation whilst standing in the area of a supported totem in 0.2, but now it provides rage as a percentage of physical damage dealt by the totems leached back to you. So I wanted to mention this support considering how good the current Mortar Cannon totem setups are right now. But there's also other ways that you can capitalise on the mechanics of the Blood of the Warrior Flask, because the rage isn't the only powerful part of this item. There's also the fact that it's a persistent effect that doesn't disappear on reaching full life, and that means you can make use of modifiers that grant boosts during Flask effects. For example, the Stimulant notable on the passive tree for 16% increased attack speed during any Flask effect. That is a lot of attack speed. Or the Imbibed Power notable for 6% increased attack speed and 25% increased damage during any Flask effect. Both of those are in the Ranger section of the tree, which is probably the most ideal class to make use of this Flask in this patch. Now overall, this new unique Flask is really quite powerful to enable rage on non-melee attack builds like never before in PoE 2. And even just utilising it at a baseline level without over-investing can provide a huge damage boost with very little investment. But you can also really double down on the Flask usage to gain a lot more out of it, and I expect we'll see a lot of ranged attack builds picking this new item up as 0.3 progresses. And that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.